Thank you for joining me for another episode of Build Your Poetry Manuscript with KMA. I am KMA Sullivan, founder and publisher of YesYes Books. In episode 8, we're going to look at shaping your manuscript. This is a three-parter because this is a big topic. And we're going to start with the notion of getting to know the poems in your manuscript pile. So before choosing a shape, you need to know what's there, how the pieces are talking to one another, how they're relating to one another. Looking at that question first will better allow you to choose the shape of the manuscript that you have in the end. One of the big differences between writing and revising individual poems and putting together a manuscript is that the poems in a manuscript are in relationship to each other. They talk to each other and you can hear them chatting. So in order to set up the shape of the manuscript, which of course involves order as well, you need to get to know them in the groups that they are in and the groups that they might be in, the groups you are going to consider for them. The same poem is going to belong in different groups, or maybe better to call categories. So for example, you have, of course, the styles of poems. You might have prose blocks and movement across the page and cascading short line poems. You might have the exact same style throughout the manuscript, and that's also great. But mostly what I see with first manuscripts is a variety of styles. That's one kind of category. Another kind of category involves voice. You may have the same voice throughout your manuscript, but you also might have different voices for different reasons. It could be if you're tracing the voice of a single person through time, but it also might be different voices, different people that who are speaking or thinking, experiencing throughout your manuscript. Another category involves chronology, and involves chronology in different ways. If the heart of your manuscript has to do with an event, an occurrence, a specific moment in a relationship, then the poems might fall into a kind of before and after. So to begin thinking about that type of chronology. You might have a voice that moves through time, starts younger, for instance, or also moves through heart, moves through experience. Could be the same age in theory as far as the speaker goes, but there is a movement in a particular direction involving the heart of the manuscript. The categories mentioned are by no means exhaustive, not even close, but it gives you an idea of the different ways you need to think about the, say, 60 poems in your manuscript, to think of the different ways these poems are going to show up in a manuscript, the different kinds of work they're going to do. And then once you've landed on some categories, I really recommend that you organize the poems according to categories in different ways. There are different ways to do that. So for example, taking some painter's tape, because it's kind of a low stick tape, print out your manuscript and then put it up on a wall. Some people spread their manuscript out on the floor. The brilliant poet Caleb Ray Kendrilli shared a method that they use in a panel that we were on together about publishing, where they mentioned that they use colored tabs, and each color stands for a different category. And so on any given page of poetry, it might have 3 or 4 or more different colors. It depends on how far down you're going to drill down into the categories. Another way to organize your poems according to categories is simply to print out and then put in piles and shift the piles around. And then, of course, the final way is simply to have a Word doc or a PDF that you're creating using cut and paste and organizing the pieces according to these different categories. Of course, some of these methods are a little bit less fluid, less flexible than others, but that's also fine. This method needs to be a good match for your temperament and for the way that your brain works. So there's no right way. The thing that you're aiming for here is an awareness of what different categories exist in the book, and also which categories have a whole lot of poems and which have very few or even just one. Now, the answer to that question is not going to immediately determine what happens to the group or to the poem. For instance, if you have an outlier where there's a poem that has very little crossover with the other categories in the book, on the one hand, it's possible that that poem needs to be pulled. It's possible that that poem doesn't belong in the collection, but it's also possible that that poem is going to serve a very particular purpose in your collection. So an awareness of categories and which and how many poems are in each category is not in itself a determiner of what's going to happen to the poems. Another example of that is, let's say you've got 20 prose block poems. I love a good prose block poem. What does that mean? Is it automatically going to mean that they are in their own section? No, not at all. It could mean that, and we'll talk about sectioning in a manuscript in the next video. But it could be a poem that exists, that needs to exist throughout the manuscript because of the particular work that poem is doing and the particular types of relationships that poem is going to have to the poetry that surrounds it. One of the things that's interesting about this process is it shows us aspects of our manuscript group that we might not have been aware of. So, for example, let's say that you have written a couple of cascading poems, short lines down the page, and they're very memorable to you for whatever reason. You might not be aware that you've only got a couple of those. And that's also fine, depending on what they're doing. But you need to ask yourself, is that enough? For what this type of poem is doing, this style of poem, is that enough? Or do I need a few more of those? When you're thinking about the category of heart, the relationship of the poems to the heart that you are presenting in this manuscript, have you offered all the facets of the heart that you mean to offer? Our emotional lives, our experiences are so beyond complex. Have you offered the level of complexity that satisfies you? So organizing along categories builds your awareness of what the poem group is, the different facets, which facets are overrepresented possibly or underrepresented possibly, and you'll begin to really know the poetry as a group. The process of shaping the manuscript is, I would say, one of the most exhausting, most frustrating. It's not really tedious as much as it is confusing sometimes. So you need to go in, dive in, do this categorizing, thinking about the different groups of poems, go plant some tulips, crochet something, and then some days later come back and ask yourself the same questions and see what happens. Now that you have put into your head the entire manuscript group and let it live in there. Some things will emerge, new categories, perhaps, new realizations about how the poems are talking to one another, what the poems are doing, how they are living together. So hang in there. Your work is worth this effort. Thank you for being with me today. Have a great rest of your day.